I'm going to present some joint work with Alain Dejanvry and Elizabeth Saudelet, who are here, as well as Manzoor Dar, who's at the International Rice Research Institute in Delhi. And it's all on one type of new rice, okay? One type of new flood-tolerant rice that is rapidly spreading throughout South Asia. So, the project. This is a research partnership between Berkeley and the International Rice Research Institute, which a lot of people have already touched on a little bit, okay? So, in terms of what the focus is, this is a focus on Swarna sub 1, which is a new type of flood-tolerant rice. The name sort of says it all. It's just like Swarna, which is a very popular rice variety grown throughout eastern India, Bangladesh, but it's got the submergence tolerance locus added to it. Just one group of genes that plant breeders worked a long, long time to figure out how to precisely insert this locus of genes into Swarna to give it flood tolerance. So starting with this technology, we set out with this particular project to look at three things. The first is just efficacy. Does this stuff work in farmers' fields, okay? First order business. Does it work when we give it to farmers? Second, how does it change their decisions? We've sharply reduced the risk that they face in terms of flooding, which happens a lot in eastern India and Bangladesh. How does it change the decisions they make? The inputs they use? How do they choose to plant the plot? These type of things. Third, moving downstream. So it's starting furthest upstream to furthest downstream, thinking about diffusion, okay? So after the first two, can decentralized trade between farmers? This is just a standard way of seeds moving hands throughout the world, is farmers trading it amongst themselves. Can this system of farmer-to-farmer exchange efficiently allocate this new rice? Okay, so that's the third thing. I'm going to talk about all three of these, all sort of packaged together around this Swarna sub 1. Okay, it's quite a unique opportunity to work with IRRI, I must say. In addition to developing these new varieties, IRRI allocates a substantial amount to dissemination. So they have a whole branch in South Asia that focuses on dissemination, and this often occurs through partnerships with national governments. An example of this is this National Food Security Mission, which is a current initiative in India, which of course focuses on food security, but at the same time has made a significant investment in the spread of some new stress-tolerant rice varieties. So there's a clear link between IRRI and national governments, which can be really impactful when it comes time to start thinking about turning these research findings into actionable strategies that we can think about at a larger scale. Okay? Now, I'm starting to step a teeny bit out of my area of expertise. I'm more on the evidence part of evidence to action. Umesh, who's here from IRRI, is on the action side of the evidence to action. So he's next. So we'll keep this in mind. I'll just give you the rest of that little talk on the evidence side. Okay, first piece of evidence. First study on efficacy. Randomized experiment carried out in 128 villages in Odisha in wet season 2011. Some people got this new rice. Others stuck with the Swarna that they were cultivating before. So it works. What you see is that happened to be that after we gave out this rice in 2011, there was flooding, and it varied spatially across our sample. Allowed us to observe how the new rice works at various durations of flooding. And with this top part of the graph, you can see the effect of this Swarna sub 1 in terms of yield measured in percent. So it's the percentage gain that Swarna sub 1 gave in yield relative to Swarna. Two things to note. First, when there's no flood, which happened in about 20% of our sample, these things are on par, giving you the same thing. So the trade-off is not a yield penalty under normal conditions. This is purely a function of the 20 years of breeding effort to produce the left part of this curve, okay? And then as flood severity worsens, starting and ending at about 12 days of flood, the yield gain peaks at about 60%. So there's real meaningful gains in yield, okay? The number of farmers who have seen this curve is 0. what farmers see is more something like this, okay? This is an image that was taken just last year in an area where it flooded twice, one for 3 days and then one for about 9 days. And this was also in Odisha. And the way this works is what Swarna tries to do when the flood comes is it tries to grow above the surface. It tries to grow above the surface of the water. It uses all the energy that's stored in the plant in doing this. So when the water recedes, there's no energy left to rejuvenate. Swarna sub 1 stunts or represses this process, okay? So it works by repressing what the natural response of the rice plant is. And these are, again, the results that farmers see in the field. So with this first study, we wanted to sort of close and think about who are the people who are benefiting from this stuff, okay? It clearly works in flooded areas. So who are the people who are really going to benefit from this? So what we did was we took satellite images of a historic flood that happened in 2008 in Odisha, and we matched those up with village locations from the census of India to see who are the people, what are the characteristics of the people that are in these low-lying flood-prone areas. What we see is quite stark. The people who happen to be cultivating land and living in these low-lying areas are the most marginalized, the lowest caste, generally the least privileged caste group in the Hindu caste system, which is a scheduled caste group, okay? So this bar chart shows you probabilities of flooding from that analysis for 2 groups. The red bar is for a village that's entirely lower caste people, and the gray bar is for the village that is more upper caste people. And you see that contrast, particularly in the flash flood areas. So the nice thing about this is that the technology not only increases aggregate production during flooding, but it does it the most for people who historically have struggled quite a lot. So that's study 1, agronomy is nice. Study 2, let's start thinking about decisions and how it changes the way that farmers make decisions, okay? So this is the same exact experiment, but this was carried out 1 year later, same area, happened to not flood the second year, okay? Farmers kept the Swarna sub 1, cultivated it again in the second year. And so we wanted to think about, due to this reduction in risk, what happens? Do farmers do things that they otherwise didn't want to do because of the risk that they were exposed to? We see a lot of stuff. Farmers cultivate more land in the second year. They use more early fertilizers. What I mean by early fertilizers, the P and K fertilizers, the fertilizers that you put on the rice plant earlier in the growing season, those that are most exposed to risk of being lost at flooding, since flooding can happen anytime after planting, all the way up until about 2 months before harvest. They change the way that they plant. They're more likely to use the transplanting way of planting rice, which is very labor intensive. It involves a significant labor investment. Early in the season, you have to manually plant the rice like this, but the yield is higher. Okay? There's a large production gain associated with it, but it's very risky. Finally, a last couple of things. We see an increased uptake of agricultural credit, so a crowd in of credit. And then in the area we saw during field work, one of the things that farmers do is they save an excessive amount of rice after each harvest. They save a huge amount of rice. And what they tell you is, well, we want to have a buffer stock in case next year is a flood year. So we see a slight decrease in this behavior, which again makes sense given that they're now more protected against that event. So all in all, we see yield go up by 10% in this normal year. And this can't be due to agronomy because, again, when there's no flood, Swarna sub 1 is just like Swarna. This is driven by the way that this technology causes farmers to be less likely to make conservative decisions. So study number 2 is all about decisions. 3, okay, pretty convinced that the technology is doing some nice things with the first 2. How about getting it into farmers' hands? So the question here is, does this system of decentralized exchange work? Now, farmer-to-farmer exchange is quite common in India and other parts of the world. And in a lot of these remote, stress-prone areas, private seed companies are not there. The government supplies seeds through local block offices, a system that's highly unreliable. A lot of times, the seed won't even be there when the rains come. Farmers are trying to get seed from local government offices, but they can't. So going into this, there's a lot of emphasis on, well, can we rely on local communities to efficiently share this rice? We didn't know anything about this going in, so that was the purpose of the experiment. It was carried out in 82 villages, different villages in Bhadrak district of Odisha, and this experiment compares two different ways of trading. First, in all the villages, 5 random farmers were given Swarna Sub 1 prior to planting during the 2012 season. In one year later, after these people had grown the rice, harvested it, and were ready to make whatever exchanges they wanted to make, half of the villages, we did nothing. So sit back, let farmer-to-farmer diffusion do what it naturally does. This is the status quo. Let's see how well it works. Now, in the other half of the villages, in order to get a benchmark to compare what happened in the network-based system of trade, actually went around, eliminated all barriers on the supply side, and knocked on people's doors and offered to sell this rice to them at prices that were comparable to what was happening when we weren't there, okay? So this, again, eliminates all these barriers, tells us exactly how much people wanted this stuff, and then we can compare that with what happened in the farmer-to-farmer system of diffusion. So this treatment is really, really simple. Drive around on a little motorized taxi, ask people if they want to buy these little 5 kg packets. This woman happened to want to buy one, and the first finding from this is that she was not at all alone, okay? So when we do nothing and allow exchange between farmers, and you survey the people who didn't get the rice originally, only 7% of them adopt it after 1 year. So only 7% take it up. When we just go knock on their door and ask them whether they want to buy it from us, 40% do. So there's a huge gap in between the people who actually want this rice and the people who get it when they have to rely on their peers as a source of supply. So the farmer-to-farmer model doesn't look great in terms of adoption. Why is that? The first reason why is that people tend to want to share with people who are like them. So people tend to concentrate their exchanges amongst people who belong to the same subcaste, who share the same surname with them. All right, so what this graph shows you is shows you that same adoption gap, but it shows you how it's a function of how connected the person is to the original 5 people who got the rice, where connected is defined by sharing the same surname, which is a very important marker of social connection in rural Indian villages. So you see that for people who share the same surname with more of those original 5 guys, this gap closes. So identity matters. Identity certainly matters in terms of these exchanges, okay? Now, all is not lost because a unique thing that we can do with this particular type of rice is quantify for each farmer a measure of the expected returns or expected gains they're going to get with the rice. Because we know from their plots how severe historically the flooding has been from surveys, so we can take that very first curve that I showed you and generate a measure of expected return in terms of yield. How much, starting at the season, can this farmer expect to gain from this rice? Quite simply, the person who has land where it never floods can expect to gain nothing. The person who has land where it floods 12 days every single time can expect to gain quite a lot. So we can take the adopters in these two systems and see about quality of adopters or targeting. Which system generates a pool of adopters who have higher expected gains from the technology? Now here, this is on log scale, so we can interpret this as percentage. It happens to be the case that the network-based system of exchange does produce a slightly better targeted outcome, okay? So you have a trade-off between overall adoption and quality of adopters, okay? Now, you can probably guess which one is going to dominate from those two graphs because that adoption effect was huge, all right? So what I did here is one last bar chart to think about how much gets left on the table with this system of network-based exchange, okay? Now, remember there's 2 sources of benefits here. The first is agronomic during the first year. Just if there's a flood, you're going to benefit, okay? The second is during the second year, according to study 2, You do things. You use more fertilizer. You cultivate more land. You do these things that increase your revenue. Importantly, revenue is one caveat of this, okay? You do things that increase your revenue. So this is a 2-year measure of expected revenue, where in the first year you do nothing, the second year you make all of these investments. So over a 2-year period, how much gets left on the table if we were to rely on farmer-to-farmer diffusion in some of these remote areas? And it's a lot, okay? It turns out if you put these in US dollars, to some $20 or $30 per farmer in terms of revenue, okay? So the main message is that there's a lot of people, again, who want this stuff who don't get it if the supply side is not there. So the sort of policy implications, which Umesh again will talk to more, how these have affected decisions, is that the technology certainly works in terms of agronomics, and it also works by reducing conservative behavior. But the third result is sitting back and relying on community-based exchange isn't going to get us that far. Now, importantly, this wasn't designed to say that what we should go do is now knock on everybody's door in Odisha with, a truck of 5 tons of seed. More, it was to identify whether, if there was a gap, to what magnitude it was, and can there be some more intermediate things we do. So I'll speak to that in about 30 more seconds. But more generally, and I think more in line with some of the discussion for today, is that this really points to barriers on the supply side as being very real, okay? What this treatment was in the third study was just a free and easy source of supply. All you did was go and knock on somebody's door and ask them if they wanted it, okay? So giving them a free and easy source of supply boosts adoption by a large amount. So focus on the supply side is very, very real for understanding why take-up of agricultural technologies is quite low in some contexts. So where to take this? What we want to start to think about next is, in the absence of the private sector, when some of these seeds are in the process of being multiplied, or in areas where the private sector is not there, can decentralized trade between farmers work to spread seeds between farmers over the short run, all right? And there's a couple things you could think. Perhaps randomly selecting 5 guys was not very smart way of targeting the stuff. And that's certainly possible. The second is there could be a coordination problem between original cultivators, the people who had the Swarna sub-1, and the people who potentially wanted the Swarna sub-1. If there's a coordination problem, then maybe some little nudge to bring these people together can have an impact in terms of spreading the rice. So in future work, what we want to try and think about is thinking about whether engaging local groups as points of introducing the technology can identify better seed growers, better people as original entry points, and lead to more rapid diffusion. So that's one thing. And the second is there a coordination problem? And if there is, can we organize little seed fairs, which are very simple, just bring the original cultivators together with the people who potentially want to buy this stuff, and by organizing this very event, can we make these transactions happen? So that's sort of the state of all this stuff on Swarna sub-1. I'll pass it along to Umesh Singh, who's here from the International Rice Research Institute. He's based out of Dhaka as well as Delhi. He is responsible for pretty much coordinating Strasa in South Asia. Strasa is stress-tolerant rice for Africa and South Asia, who's liaises very closely with people in the Indian government as well as in other governments to work on dissemination of stress-tolerant varieties. So we'll leave it now for Umesh to